talking about the M1 chip with Adam Engst and the Virginia Macintosh Users Group. This is MacVoices. This edition of MacVoices is supported by TextExpander by Smile, the makers of world-class software. Visit textexpander.com/podcast to learn more and download your free demo. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, this is a special sort of MacVoices Live because we're live, even though it's not our usual live show. We're live with Adam Engst as our guest speaker. Adam, welcome. It's good to see you, as always.
Nice to see you too, Chuck, and everyone in Virginia.
Exactly, because we are live with the Virginia Macintosh User Group. So VMUG, welcome, and thanks for having us. We really appreciate it. We have a few bashful people that are not on camera, but we have a nice little crowd here. And they have asked us to talk about the M1 Macs and Apple's M1 strategy. And in the introduction we did before the show, Bob said, I guess we're going to elicit the truth or the thinking behind it. I can't think of two worse guys. Yeah, right. Can't think of two worse guys to figure it out, Adam. But here we are.
But we make it up quickly on the spot.
Exactly. So let's start this way. Do you have an M1 Mac?
I do. I would get it, but it's actually in the other room, it turns out. So I have an M1 MacBook Air, which I ordered as soon as they came out. And it was pretty astonishing, frankly, that, to be fair, I mean, my main Mac is a 2020 iMac, 27-inch iMac. So I have fair amount of performance there, but my laptop before this was a 2012 MacBook Air. So man, you want to talk night and day on the laptop side of things. The M1 is just so fast and even makes the 2020 iMac. I won't say it makes it look slow, but it's faster than the 2020 iMac in a lot of ways.
And I too have an M1. I'm a MacBook Air. Which I've found to be shockingly powerful compared to, because it's funny, Adam, because I too have a 2012 MacBook Air that I've just sort of kept around as, just a knock around computer to carry to the living room, carry to the bedroom, carry wherever.
They were great computers. And that was before Apple screwed up the keyboards. So that's what kept me from replacing it for years was the bad keyboards. And so, that was a good era for the MacBook Air. And when the M1 came out with the new keyboard and the M1 chip, it was just such a no-brainer. I was so pleased because Apple had actually updated the MacBook Air earlier in 2020, like right after the pandemic started, and with the new keyboard. They're like, "Oh, I'll get that one," but we were in lockdown. I'm not going anywhere. I do not need to buy this computer now. So I was so pleased that 6 months later I had held off when they came out with the M1 one. So that was a great happenstance.
So where does it fit into your workflow right now? Since you do have the M1 Power, but you also have that big iMac sitting there.
And the big iMac actually has a Thunderbolt 27-inch display off to the side as well. So I am a great believer of, the more pixels you have, the more productive you are. So realistically, given the fact that we're still not really going anywhere, the MacBook Air mostly gets used, sort of around the house. If I want to be working downstairs, we use it for a lot of Zoom calls where it's on the kitchen table, that kind of thing. So I haven't really appreciated its performance as much as that I might have, just because the main time when I live with a laptop is when I'm on the road. That, going on a trip, and now it's 5 days with nothing else going on, and you really get to know the performance level there. One other thing that I'll be curious, because this is actually one of the markers that I use to tell me when to buy a new laptop, is I do a lot of presentations, and so if I ever feel like a presentation is bogging because of performance, that's the immediate kicker of I need a new computer. And the MacBook Air was really on the edge there because of 2012 one, because that was just, I was starting to, I'd be using Keynote or something and I'd get a spinning pizza of death, or, just it wouldn't be as snappy as I wanted to switch apps to be able to show what I wanted to show in real time. And that's what I'm really looking forward to, that real world test of the M1 at some point, and hopefully this year when I travel again.
If we all travel again.
Yeah, it's like if that ever happens again. I am fully vaccinated. How many people here are fully vaccinated? Raise your hands. Hey, all right. That's good to hear. So yeah, so I mean, I'm less worried, but I will admit I'm still not comfortable with the concept of traveling.
Yeah, that's a whole other discussion. And it's so tempting to go there, but we won't go there.
The M1 is not helping with that problem.
Yes, one of the few things it's not helping with.
Yeah, right.
So along with the M1, we have Big Sur, and I'm kind of curious because obviously the M1 is running Big Sur because that's what it does.
Yeah.
What are you doing on your iMac?
Also Big Sur. Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yep. Yeah. I updated a while back at this point. I can't even quite remember when. But the M1 was, obviously Big Sur from the beginning, and that I had put Big Sur on Tanya's 2016 MacBook Pro as a test machine, and it was sort of okay there, during beta and whatnot. But the M1, just as living with it again made it a little bit easier to then switch the 2020 iMac to Big Sur later on. And, I have to admit, I'm just not someone who cares that much about what version of the operating system I'm running. That I work in apps. 99% of my time is in my apps, and my apps look and work the same pretty much regardless of what operating system I'm running. So I just didn't notice a huge amount of difference. I mean, every now and then there's something which is Big Sur specific that I like or I'm a little annoyed by. So I like Control Center. I'm annoyed by the proxy icon not being as easy to get to in the Finder. Things like that. So very seldom do I run into software compatibility issues. We had the TidBITS issue I just put out. We actually we were using MYOB account edge for our accounting, and that was not 32-bit or 64-bit compatible. So Tanya's machine has been left on Mojave because of that. And so, she's looking forward to being able to come up to modern times as well.
Well, that's why I was curious, because TidBITS, and in fact, this is coming up in the chat as we're talking, but TidBITS, I know in the past you've hesitated to upgrade in certain ways because you have a very specific set of recipes and a selection of programs that you use to create it. Judy in the chat says, I can't update OS until Photoshop works. And Robert asks, what websites do you recommend to check compatibility? So
I don't believe there's any problems with Photoshop in Big Sur. I mean, I don't use it a lot, but I have launched it certainly since upgrading. There's a site called Roaring Apps, and that's, if I'm ever going to check, that's where I check to see if something is going to be compatible. And so let's go over there and check out Photoshop. And oh gosh, there's 17,000 versions of Photoshop listed here. Yeah, it's like they're saying Adobe Photoshop CC 2019 works in Big Sur. So, and so that's, like if you're using Creative Cloud or Creative Suite 6, yeah, that's a different problem. Then you're, however many years out of date, and that's going to be an issue. I don't know exactly where that one fits in the compatibility chart. But if you're subscribing to Creative Cloud, then there shouldn't be a problem with that. Realistically, we think about the upgrades, but very seldom have we been blocked. So it's more that we actually in TidBITS never formally recommended that people upgrade to Catalina. We did it, it was okay for us, but the fact is Catalina had issues, and Apple never really solved them completely to my satisfaction before they announced Big Sur. And, at that point, just stay put. And, so I will say that Big Sur, despite being a much larger UI change, has been really very solid. I have not noticed any significant issues at all. So, for people who jump from Mojave to Big Sur and miss Catalina, you're not missing anything. I don't really recommend Catalina.
Well, that's interesting because I found Catalina to be pretty darn stable, and not that Big Sur isn't. Big Sur is fine, but yeah, Catalina. In fact, the machine I'm recording and we're doing the show on is running Catalina, and it's been pretty bulletproof.
At this point, Catalina's fine. Catalina had a very, very rocky start, and with numerous updates and numerous quick, we screwed up again updates, where we fixed something and blew something else up. So, that's why I'm saying we never officially recommended it, even though we, in fact, did upgrade ourselves, because it was one of those situations where you just didn't feel comfortable telling people that it was going to be okay, that, there had been too many problems. Apple Mail had bugs that to this day do not seem to be addressed, and they may simply be uncommon enough that they're not being a huge problem as far as people upgrading anymore. Because I don't know that they're fixed in Big Sur either, but I don't use Mail, so I've managed to avoid that. But it was just enough stuff that kept us holding off on that official recommendation, which we have already obviously given for Big Sur. So.
Judy in the chat room points out that there's also some Photoshop plugins she needs. And I know I'm not a Photoshop user, but I have the same sort of issue with Final Cut, that there are plugins that I need for that program. And some of those developers seem to be just a little bit slower in upgrading things to work with Big Sur and more accurately with the M1 Macs. I mean, because that's the real change here. Photoshop, Judy, you're right. Photoshop is not Big Sur native. Is that the optimized? Maybe is a better word.
It's not M1 native.
It's not M1 native. Excuse me. Yes,
right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's totally compatible with Big Sur, but it's not fully M1 native. So there are some aspects of it. There's basically some features you don't get, and so then the question is: are those features that you really need, or the other thing I'm not 100% certain for, I'd have to look up because I'm not a Photoshop user particularly. I believe you could run Photoshop and I don't know if they ship a universal binary or if you had to get a different version, but you could run it in Rosetta too on the M1 Mac, and then you'd essentially be running the Intel code, which wouldn't have those limitations. So that's another thing we can talk about, is that Apple has one of the kind of the amazing things about the M1 Macs is that Apple's Rosetta 2 environment is kind of like they did with Rosetta to begin with. It's actually a little faster than some of these some of these apps were on previous hardware, because the M1 is so fast, even though it's slowed down by having to emulate.
Talk a little bit about the way they've implemented Rosetta this time, because as I understand it, and my experience has been, you install Big Sur, and you have to basically launch an app that needs Rosetta, and it says, "Okay, do you want to run this under Rosetta?" Yes. You say, "Yeah," and then you jump through the hoops, and after that, you're done. But I was just a little surprised that they. I guess the logic is that if you don't need to run Rosetta, why be running it? But it just
and to be clear, obviously, you're not installing Big Sur on these on these Macs. They come with it, the M1 Mac. So it's literally just the first time you launch Microsoft Word or whatever, you'll get that dialogue saying install Rosetta. You go like, huh? Okay. You click OK, and then everything just works. It's a little slow the first time to launch any Rosetta app because it's actually translating the instructions from Intel-based instructions to M1-based instructions, and then it's caching that. And so the apps will launch super fast after that. Although if for whatever reason that cache needs to be refilled, cleared out, then it'll be a little bit slower on the next time it has to translate, like if the app is updated or something like that. So it's actually, it's a little bit odd, as you say, to why didn't they just ship it, at least now? Like I could see them in whatever the next version of macOS is, making it optional. But whatever. It's a dialog box and a few seconds of download. It's not really a big deal, and it frankly just works. Once you've got it, you don't even think about it anymore.
And it's been surprising. I haven't seen a lot of articles out there about Rosetta. I mean, obviously, when Big Sur was announced and the M1s were announced, and this is the way it's going to work. Sure, that got a lot of coverage, but there's been so little coverage, which is a testament to just how well it does work.
Yeah. I mean, Glenn Fleischman wrote a big article for us on sort of like the difference between virtualization and emulation and where Rosetta fit in that. And one of the things that's interesting about Rosetta is that what it doesn't get you is the ability to run anything that will run on an Intel chip. So it is just tightly tracked to exactly what Mac apps can do. And so that's why, for instance, when you use VMware Fusion now or Parallels Desktop, you cannot virtualize a Intel-based operating system because Rosetta won't help you there. Rosetta is just unrelated. But it's it was something that Apple, had they wished to, they could have built Rosetta so to emulate like the entire Intel architecture, but that would have obviously been taken them longer, been harder, and probably been slower. So with this way, Rosetta is super fast and works well and just makes it easy.
MacVoices is supported by Smile, the makers of world-class software like Text Expander. If there is one productivity utility that you check out this month, it should be Text Expander. That's a pretty bold statement, so let me explain. Text Expander is one of those utilities that will benefit any Apple user, because we all have things that we type over and over. That means you are wasting time typing those things over and over. That means you might get sloppy with it and make mistakes in typing those things over and over. Text Expander to the rescue. In literally seconds, you can set up a short string of characters that text expands into those things that you type over and over. Automatically, quickly, correctly every single time. And those things can be as short as your email address or as long as a several-page set of instructions on how to change the bag in your vacuum cleaner. Whatever. The point is that everyone can get something out of Text Expander, even at its most basic level. And believe me, there's a whole lot more on top of that basic level. For now, though, visit smilesoftware.com/podcast to download a demo version of Text Expander, install it, and start being more productive in a few minutes. That's smilesoftware.com/podcast for your copy of Text Expander. And while you're there, be sure to check out PDF Pen and PDF Pen Pro, two other world-class utilities from Smile. Thank you to Smile for being the longest-running sponsor of MacVoices.
So this group is anxious just to get into the meat of things. So I love it. I guess they're all pretty well versed in what an M1 is and how it works. But Bob asks, do you have any sense of how Windows emulation works on the M1 Macs? So the first question is, why do you care? But after that, Adam, do you have any sense of how it works?
I do, and we went over this in Glenn's article actually, and it's kind of messy, frankly, at the moment, because what you can emulate or what you can do with Windows on the M1 Macs is you can run Parallels Desktop for the M1 Macs, and then you can get into the Windows Insider program, which allows you to download Windows for ARM. So it's a different version of Windows. And then Windows for ARM can emulate Windows Intel apps. So that is and I do not have a sense of how well that works. I haven't tried to do that with any significant stuff, partly because I have one Windows app I use only, actually, Bob will appreciate this, I only use it to run track meets. So it's the only reason why I do anything with emulation at all is to run High-Tech Meet Manager, which is a truly horrible app, but it's Windows only, and it's unfortunately better than anything else that's out there, which is a testament to how bad those traps are. So, but yeah, so like, I mean, actually, it was amusing because I was letting Windows do this. I hadn't opened Parallels it was on the 2012 MacBook Air, right? So I use the track meets, I take the MacBook. And so I hadn't opened it since October of 2019 because our entire year was canceled. I didn't use the track meet software for a year. And so Windows had to spend like days updating itself. It was horrible. I mean, it was just like, okay, every time I go over, it's asking me something or still pending or who knows what. I was just like, I can't believe this. But I mean, I guess if you don't upgrade something for a year, maybe the user experience isn't so good. But so yeah, so no, in general, do not expect to be running Windows apps on an M1 MacBook or an M1 Mac unless you're willing to jump through some fairly significant hoops and probably have some limitations. Because by the time you're virtualizing through Parallels, having running Windows for ARM, which is not, presumably the most stable and supported thing, because you can only get it with the Windows Insider program, and then running the emulation for Intel apps within that, there's just no telling.
Adam, we've had some of these discussions about a lot of things, Windows included. And this just feels like one of those times, again, that we are in a transition period as Apple manages this transition over to the M series Macs or for M series chips, whatever that means. And I think a lot of folks are just flat out impatient. They want everything to work, the way they want it to right now, and it's just not going to happen. But this is not unlike some other transitions we've been through in the past.
Well, and the other thing to remember is Apple's in a very different space now. So it was a big deal when Apple switched to the Intel chips that virtualization was going to become a thing. I mean, I remember when the first version of, I don't even remember what it was, whether it was Parallels or Fusion. I think it was Fusion, came out, and Joe Kissel wrote a Take Control book for us about it. And it was huge that you could run Windows on a Mac. And at that time, I mean, if you go back that far in history, that was really important for Apple as a company. Now, I'm willing to put money on the fact that Apple couldn't care less. Can't run Windows on a Mac? Oh, well, too bad on you. Boot Camp's certainly not moving over. Why should Apple care? Apple considers the Mac and the Apple ecosystem complete as far as what people need. Now, not saying that's necessarily true. They don't have high-tech Meat Manager, for instance. But the fact is that that from Apple's perspective, they don't see that as a need that they need to fill. And so they're not, I mean, not to say that it couldn't be done, but Apple's not going to make it easy.
Adam, do you think that's, let's see, I don't want to offend anyone here, but well, you'll see what I mean in a minute. But I think back then, there was this perception that Apple was still, it was still building computers for tech people and geeks. Now it's building computers for everyone. I mean, literally, Steve Jobs' vision of the computer for the rest of us. And I don't think there's as much attention paid to some of those techie solutions as there is to just what the average consumer needs, and then the rest of us sort of go along for the ride and use whatever software we have to get there.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly some of that, but I think it's more just that Apple is top of the world right now. I mean, they wouldn't have done this they wouldn't have done Intel stuff, Intel Windows emulation back then if they had been on top of the world. I mean, this is like who's on top calls the shots. And so, I mean, if Windows, the ability to run Windows software had been important to Apple, they could have built that into the M1 chip. I mean, they have that capability. And when you control the silicon completely, it's just not important to them. It's as simple as that. And I don't think it's techie or non-techie. It's simply they're all in on the Apple ecosystem. Why should they support Microsoft's ecosystem?
Interesting point. They
don't gain any. I mean, realistically, they don't need to gain anything from it. I mean, the M1 Macs have been a huge hit. The Macs in general are selling like hotcakes right now. I think Apple is just, and of course, their goal is to make the Apple ecosystem as tight as possible with the iPhone and the iPad and the Apple Watch, Apple TV, and everything like that, and the HomePod. So that it's a situation where going out and being compatible with the other guy, you just don't need it. I mean, might be, not to say that people don't want it or that it might not be useful, but Apple doesn't see any benefit to them in doing it. They're not going to lose sales because of it. Put it that way.
That's a really interesting bottom line comment. That if I have to decide, gee, can I emulate Windows or am I in the Apple ecosystem? And yeah, heck, I can go and buy a cheap Windows laptop. I mean, cheap.
Right.
So
$200, right?
Yeah. So if I really need to run something, your high tech meat manager or whatever,
right?
Then
Precisely.
I can go and buy it.
Yeah, right. It's just not. I mean, and that's part of it. Is I think, and that's part of what Apple is sort of seeing is that they don't need to compete against that stuff. Doesn't help. So, and I mean, Apple. It's always important to remember that Apple is a very, very thoughtful company when it comes to the business side of things. That doesn't always result in decisions that we like, but Apple cares very deeply about making money, and they make an awful lot of it. So, yeah, everything has to be filtered through that lens.
You skipped over something there that I want to go back and talk a little bit about, especially in light of one of the comments in the chat. You said that Apple could have built that into the M1. And Apple could have built a lot of things into the M1, and I think they were selective about what they do. Angelo in the chat says, well, he has concerns about the build quality since 2016. Plus, the MacBook Pros had so many issues, keyboard design, expanding batteries, and that he doesn't feel that Apple builds quality laptops any longer. Any thoughts on that, especially since now they are building not just the laptop but the chip as well?
Well, certainly there's been no indication that there's chip problems with the chips. Obviously, we don't have that much history with them, but it's not like we're seeing these, the M1 MacBook Air, M1 MacBook Pro, or M1 Mac Minis having any more problems than anything else. I mean, I've certainly heard of a couple of people who've had problems, but I mean, there's going to be some failure rate regardless. It's hard to know. I guess what I would say is that the build quality things that Angela is talking about, I don't disagree with them, but I think they are potentially, how do I say this? So, for instance, the butterfly keyboard was a huge problem, and Apple doubled down on it multiple times. They didn't say, this is a terrible keyboard that people hate. Let's redesign it. They tried to fix it 4 times over years and kept failing. I mean, there's 4 generations of that keyboard. And I think that's more the problem than anything else. And the bulging batteries, I don't know that how prevalent that is. The thing they're getting hit for, as well as what is it called? We'll call it flex gate. Basically, in the screens, there's a little connector that can break and can be a problem on the MacBooks. It feels to me like what we're doing, the engineering level on these devices where parts of them move, is just so hard now because of the tolerances that we're trying to achieve, that Apple isn't necessarily willing to admit when they've made a mistake. So we see this much less like on the iPhones and iPads because nothing moves. So you don't have keyboards where there's travel. You don't have hinges where these things open and close, and so they're just. You grab your iPhone, and it's just this slab, and they can make sure that that keeps it a little bit more. Things don't move around inside, and that makes the build quality better, I would say. So I don't think there's a huge general problem, but there is definitely a resistance to fixing things when problems do show up, or to resolving the problem completely. I mean, obviously Apple fixes them and often even, has free repair programs to people do it, but it's fussy. I mean, to have to send your MacBook back to get a new keyboard 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, the keyboard thing was really very interesting. Some people seem to have few problems with it, but it seemed that there was a substantial number that really did.
So many people did. It really wasn't in anyone's imagination.
Yeah, that one. But your comment about the tolerances is an excellent one. And I also think that there's something about the fact that these are not the fragile machines, the fragile machines we thought they were. So now they're being used a little bit harder. And I'm not looking at anyone, but I mean, I see people doing things with their laptops that I would never think of doing with my laptop. Now they don't quite use them as Frisbees, but there are times that, they'll toss them down on a desk or whatever. And it's like, no, I place my MacBook Pro on the desk. I don't throw it down. And just little things like that,
And I would say also that, I mean, like my son's graduating from Cornell this in a few weeks. So I've seen how, college students use laptops, and they just beat on them. And part of it is I would actually suggest that we relate to our particularly laptops in a different way than we used to. So back in the day, when we had PowerBook 100s or, Wall Street PowerBook G3s, that kind of thing, those were expensive, important machines that we relied on, and they were still kind of unusual. Like we didn't have that entire mindset of everything I do is in my laptop, and and I just have it with me at all times and whatnot. So now people are much more. It's like these things are an extension of them. They go everywhere with them. It's just like it's with them at all times. And as a result, it gets treated a little bit less well, I think. I see it's commonplace to see people, toss a laptop on a bed, for instance. You would never have done that, 15 years ago. So it's just, I think Apple has done a pretty good job on the whole of making these things, particularly when they're closed, pretty durable. But, as I said, my son accidentally broke a screen once by closing it when his, just the wrong moment, the cable for his earbuds, so the microphone jack, slipped into, so it was like right on the edge of the screen. He closed it on that, broke the screen. And then that, because of the way the screen is attached, he had to have the motherboard replaced too. It was all covered by, Apple Care, / warranty. But, that was a sort of thing where, that happens when you've got really fine tolerances. It doesn't happen when you've got something where there's just a lot more space in there, as there used to be.
Right. And that situation sounds like a genuine accident. I mean,
it really was. So he certainly didn't intend to close it on the microphone jack, but but again, it's, there is a level of, it's just a part of his life, right? It's not like it's this special object that you didn't have and now you do, right? You think differently about something when it's just with you all the time. And sometimes that thinking differently about it may involve not treating it with the same level of care and respect as you might otherwise. So, and I see it even in myself to a certain extent, like I would never have walked up and down the stairs holding my laptop with the screen open until, the last, 5-10 years. Part of it is, of course, laptops are thin and light enough that you can do that. But that's a terrible, stupid thing to do because, if there's one time you're going to trip or, hit something or whatever, it's going down. Our stairs turn a corner too. So there's a banister, and like, it's a dumb thing to do, but I still catch myself doing it periodically because, it's just this thing that I walk around with sometimes now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I do it too. And I catch myself and think, this is dumb. And if I make a mistake, I'm going to pay for it. But I do it anyway,
And you don't usually make a mistake, but every now and then.
Yeah. Well, look, we've all reached out of the shower or stood up in the bathtub and flipped a light switch, which is the dumbest thing you can possibly do. But we do it and we get away with it. And you think, well, okay, that was good. That was dumb, but so
didn't electrocute myself that time.
Yeah. We're getting a lot of comments in the chats about, I guess the fact that when there are issues, that Apple usually handles them pretty efficiently through Apple Care, or like you said, through some of the special programs. So when those issues crop up, they are trying to address them.
Yeah, and I mean, this is actually, I mean, the big topic. This big general topic is right to repair, right? Should you be able to repair your Mac yourself, or go to any independent repair shop in town to get that done? And Apple is making that pretty hard. And I'm not a big fan of that, but the trick is that the simple fact of the matter is that if Apple's going to make it hard, they have to do a darn good job on the repair side to keep the customers happy. For the most part, they do. Where you run into more problems is, like, let's say you have, for instance, a 2020 iMac that has some kind of significant hardware problem. Well, you're not mailing that puppy back. That doesn't just go back in a box. So, that's where you really have to have an Apple authorized service provider available nearby. They may even have to mail it back, but that's their problem, not yours. And so, with most of the Macs being laptops these days, that's not the huge problem, but it is still an issue for those of us who get to who like our 27-inch iMacs, which will have an M1 by the end of the year, I hope.
Well, so let's go there for a second, because we now have 24-inch iMacs, and probably the most important question of all about those iMacs is, Adam, if you were buying one, which color would you get?
Oh man, I don't know. I mean, I have to admit, the problem is my desk kind of is in a corner, like faces out from a corner, so I wouldn't be able to see behind it. And it's the back colors that I really like. So I don't know, purple, red. Those are both pretty good colors. So that's where I'd be looking. But I need to see them, because the front might be a little bit too pinky or lavendery to go for it. I will say, I was shocked by the number of people who were offended by the colors. They're like, they're ugly, they're horrible. I'm like, so buy the silver and shut up already. It's like, no one cares what your personal opinion about the colors is, as long as there's a choice of silver. You just don't. I mean, personally, I think the rose gold stuff that Apple has done looks forever. It looks silly, and I would never in a million years buy it. But some people like it. Okay, fine. Whatever. It doesn't hurt me. I can get my silver or space gray or, white, whatever. It's fine. So it is interesting the level to which that has caused so much ire in some places.
The one thing that surprised me about it, though, and I guess this is just always been my preference, but the white bezel.
Well, that we're going to have to see. I mean, I haven't said anything about it, because I don't know that it's a problem. I mean, I don't think, I mean, I'm obviously used to black bezels like everyone else, but I don't automatically think they're better. I just don't know. And it's like gray. I mean, I don't think it'll be white. So I think there'll be some contrast between, like, the menu bar being white or light gray and then the bezel. I don't think it'll just sort of lead up there. But I don't know. We'll have to see. I agree. That's an unknown, but that's not something you can tell from a picture. You got to actually see that in person.
Yeah.
So
who are the?
So one of the things I just want to say about this, one of the things I find fascinating about the 24-inch iMac is it's the same chip. But that's what's so cool about the M1 is it's the exact same chip in every one of the 4 Macs that it's in, and the iPad Pro. That's pretty impressive. Almost no vendor has done that kind of a thing before, because usually it's one of those situations where you can't get the kind of performance you need in the different machines with anything, unless you start, beefing up the chip. But, to have the exact same chip from that MacBook Air all the way up to the 24-inch Mac, Bob's commenting in the chat, yes, there's going to be some slight differences in performance based on thermal properties, that the MacBook Pro and the Mac Mini and the iMac have fans, where the MacBook Air does not. But, there's not going to be that much difference. We do have the benchmarks, and it's not a huge range. So it's impressive as all get out, and that's what I think is pretty clearly what we're waiting for with the iMac, 27-inch iMac, and the higher end Mac Minis and the higher 16-inch MacBook Pros is what's next. Is it an M1X? Is it an M2? Whatever. But it seems like we need another chip to be able to bring those Macs into the fold.
Okay, so we have to go there, I guess, since you took us there a little bit. So does that mean that the 16-inch MacBook Pro, the emphasis will be on the Pro? Does that mean the 27-inch iMac or whatever the equivalent is when it comes with the M1X or M2 or whatever? Is that the new Pro machine? Will there be a new iMac Pro like we've had up to this point?
I don't think there'll be a new iMac Pro. I don't think the iMac Pro ever made any sense whatsoever. That was a silly, confused machine. I mean, very powerful, don't get me wrong, but a silly, confused machine. And it was evidence that Apple, put it out and then never touched it. I mean, it was an X parrot from the day one. But what I think we'll see, and this is pure speculation, I know nothing, but pure speculation is that we have two more types of Macs to be moved to the Apple Silicon world. So the first is the higher end Mac Minis, the 27-inch iMac, and the bigger MacBook Pro. And I'm just going to come out and say, I think what's going to happen is we're going to see, let's call it an M1X. An M1X, which has more cores. So right now we're at 4 performance cores and 4 efficiency cores. So 4 Firestorms and 4 Ice Storms, they're called. So I think we'll get more of those. And how many? Maybe, I don't know, maybe 16. Just pull a number out of a hat. 8 and 8. And it'll have more, either 16 gig or 32 gig of memory on the chip. But that's it. Then I think there will be another chip, and that one may not be coming this year, which will be for the Mac Pro and possibly a very high-end iMac, 27-inch iMac, and a very high-end Mac Mini, which will change the architecture with many more cores yet and no onboard RAM. So right now, the M1, and what I'm suggesting, they call this the M1X, has what's called unified memory. So the memory's on the same chip, which actually gives you some really great performance and efficiency issues. You benefit hugely by not having to send out everything to memory and get it back. And so that's why they've been able to get away with 8 gig and 16 gig, because it's not, normally 8 gig and 16 gig isn't that much, but it's so efficient, it can just turn the processing around so fast, it doesn't need all the extra memory. So, but if you're talking a Mac, what I'm calling these, so these Pro Macs, you'll need more memory for those. That's fine. If you want the highest end Macs, then you need a lot of memory. And that's when it doesn't make sense to put it on the chip anymore, because, there are people who install a terabyte of memory. I mean, you don't want to know how much that costs, but there are people who do it. And I think Apple wants to be able to serve those people, particularly because, some of them are like the big Hollywood, video producer types. And so they're going to want a Mac Pro that can be extended. And the only way to do that is to break the memory off the chip.
So this brings up another thing about the M1 Max, that everybody was freaking out a little bit that, oh my God, we can only get them with 8 and maybe 16 if you spent the money for it. But and Apple kept saying you don't need it. And the memory management has been surprisingly good, because I've got 8 gigs in mine, and I hardly have it. I hardly even notice any memory issues.
I got 16 just because when I was ordering, day one, it was entirely unclear what difference unified memory was going to make. And so I was like 16 minimum, not even going to 8, not even thinking about it. But what I think is interesting was just sort of, once I started understanding how the M1 deals with that unified memory, I realized that, oh, wow, yeah, you probably just don't need as much, because you can swap it in and out of memory so much faster. And even having it on the chip, there's times when you don't even have to go to memory. It's just like I can't remember the exact chip terms, but basically there's times when you can operate on it so quickly that it's not getting stored in the same way.
In the next edition of MacVoices, we continue our conversation with Adam Engst and the Virginia Macintosh Users Group about the M1 chips in both the iPad and the Macs, answer some of VMUG's questions, and touch on cybersecurity as well. That's next time on MacVoices, and I hope you'll join us. Until then, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you MacVoices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.